Yeah, all good. All good. Nice, peaceful early morning walk here. It's early in the morning and going for a nice walk and a big lap right around, and you see the Manchester skyline in the distance that way. So the camera's not facing that angle, so you probably won't be able to see it. But you can probably see the Old Lily Edge down that way, that Jodrell Bank. Is it the satellite, whatever it's called, all the way down there. You can probably sort of see it. I'm not sure the camera, but I found myself a nice little spot here. And I was doing a bit of reflecting on a question someone asked me recently on whether a street forged team of footballers could have competed against the state league team in the 90s in Sydney. Because it was a bit of a follow-up from the last video when I talked about how the identity of football was shaped by street forged footballers, going to the park and just playing, whoever. And I suppose having had one foot in one camp, where sort of being a street forged footballer up until about, say, 91 myself. I mean, up to 91, I played for the odd local team here and there, but predominantly I was a street forged footballer. And also having the experience of playing state league, from 91 to 95-ish. I reckon that I'm, well placed to sort of give some insights, anecdotally, about my own experiences. Cutting a long story short, for me, I was as happy playing street forged football, going to the park and playing five-a-side football as well on a Friday night with my mates and so on and so forth. And actually, as it happens, there was a mate of mine, Ned, you're probably watching, I don't know, but you were the one that kind of told me to play for a team, and you suggested I go down to, probably won't remember it, those years ago, go down to Avala, which became Bonnyrigg White Eagles. But at the point where I went, I did a pre-season with them, and some of the teams in Sydney and in Australia had changed. You had the national club identity policy. So you had clubs like where they changed their name based on sort of any kind of ethnicity, so to speak, in the name of the football club team. There was a policy to change it. And I think my understanding is there was a PCI policy brought in that kind of loosened the restrictions on that. But that's not the purpose of the video. The purpose of the video is to talk about, street forged footballers at that point versus state league team. That's the purpose of the video, and people can better explain those sort of policies than what I can. But the only reason I mention that, because obviously at the point that I trained with Avala, it was called Avala, and then it became known Bonnyrigg White Eagles. So I did a pre-season there, and I suppose it wasn't really for me because I was working, making ends meet at the factory. I just finished high school and enrolled in a TAFE course, technical college course. It wasn't really for me, and I was sort of looking around to see what other courses were available and doing the odd course here and there as well, and working in the factory and playing down the park. And I suppose playing down the park was a bit of escapism from reality. You finish school, what now type thing, so to speak. For hours we'd play, and it wasn't until I may have mentioned the other videos, a bloke, Elias Navarrete. He was of Chilean heritage, and I think he came over to Australia relatively young from Chile with his family, and he was just an incredibly talented footballer. Really was. Incredibly talented footballer. He had aspirations to go pro. And he only lived up the road, and I'd go down and we'd sort of play for hours, football. And that did for me. I was fine with that. We'd play against other street footballers, and we'd also play against players that came from state league teams, Super League teams. And by the way, when I mention state league, it's what became the NPL leagues, like NPL and NPL 1, 2 and 3. And obviously, I think the name's changed again. It's still the NPL as a top league in each state, but I believe it changed again. But that's not the purpose of the video again. But the point being, state league was like in the state. You had sort of at that time you had the Super League, which was the first tier, then State League 1, 2, and 3. So I predominantly played State League 1 and 2, for between say 91, 2-ish to 95-ish. Then 95-ish, I'd left to go play, or I'd left to travel overseas and into Europe and the UK and so on and so forth. But anyway, that's another story for another day. So the whole point of the video is from my experience at that time, where I spent with sort of Granville and Concord Juniors as well. I also had a bit of a stint with Petersham too, but I didn't go on board with him. The coach was a top bloke, and I used to drive to his house. He'd drive us to training. It was a long drive to Petersham, to Southwest Sydney to Petersham, but it was just too far to travel really. Stuck in traffic and to go train 2-3 times a week, and it wasn't for me. So in the end, I didn't really care too much to find a team. As Elias had suggested, Granville, Chile as they were known at the time, and they became the Wanderers, and I think they're called Condor now. But I stand corrected there. But I'm pretty sure in '95 they became called the Wanderers, I think. But anyway, long story short, so yeah, Elias and myself, we'd play. I didn't have any aspirations to be a footballer, so to speak, in that respect. I was happy into my grunge music and playing a bit of drums and that sort of stuff, really. It was more of an escapism. And we'd play against players that at the park, Smithfield Park, I mentioned before. And I suppose from my experience of experiencing both things, the moral of the story is that what I think, and the analogy I'd use would be, it's like a street fighter. It's a loose analogy, fighting a boxer, so to speak. If the street fighter fights a boxer in the ring, it's controlled. There's tactics and technique. But if a trained boxer fights a street fighter in the streets, it's a whole different ball game. That's an analogy I'll use. And I was quite fortunate that eventually, because it took a bit of time for me to settle into State League as well, sort of being a street footballer, but I was quite fortunate because then I would end up playing futsal, five-a-side, at a pretty high level. And I'd been referred to like a coach. He was a track coach who was doing some track sessions at Narrabeen. And eventually I'd sort of go and see a track coach, and that's sort of how I got into athletics as well, eventually. And I was doing some training in the off-season at the Mundine Gym in Everleigh Street. A mate of mine from school, Jason, would go down and train. So I had this sort of eclectic mix of different things, as you do, and you're working in the factory as well, making ends meet, and doing the odd course here and there, and that sort of stuff. So that kind of sets that kind of like paints a bit of a picture there. But I'd say for me, bearing in mind some of the street forge footballers we'd play in the at the park, they had State League experience. They were Super League players too, and they played as well. So bear that in mind as well. They weren't just purely, no team type thing. Some of them would play for teams and had fantastic ability. I'd also train for the teams here and there too. And I also had the opportunity, by the way, to train for the National Soccer League team, which was a top tier. Parramatta, Melita Eagles, I was on at the time. And the late Riley Rasic was the coach there. What a top bloke he was. And what a top bloke. And I was doing some training there. And, the first week, it wasn't easy to sort of adapt. They were a strong team, a lot of good players. And he goes, come back next week. And I went back the following week and went for 2 or 3 weeks, to be fair. And it was definitely above and beyond the State League, for sure. It was a lot stronger. But I kind of couldn't commit to carry on training there. I'd sort of, work and other things and, going out and whatever. And, music was a big thing in my life then as well. So I sort of decided I'll stick to state league, it's less of a commitment. So the whole point here is, I'd say, what I would say, and I just want to set the scene. What I would say for me, I would say in a game over 90 minutes, in a controlled environment, 11v11, it was purely street footballers who had no association to any team, I would say the state league team would win, because they could pace themselves tactically, technically, they'd be more organised. It wouldn't be easy, but I reckon the state league team would just have a little bit too much in the way of organisation, in the way of structure. But I reckon if the state league players didn't have experience of playing that street forged football down Smithfield Park, where you're out there and you're playing, there's no referee. You got a couple of jumpers for goalpost, and you're flying in tackles, and you're just relying on intuition. Sometimes you'll play against players you've never seen before, or you might swap the teams around a little bit. You're playing the same team as a player you've never played with before, type thing on the day. But for the most part, it was me and Elias versus whoever wanted to turn up. We'd play against 2v2. Sometimes we'd take on a whole 11 players as well. It was incredible. And Elias used to call me Canigia. That was my nickname, because I had long hair and I had a bit of pace. And that's where the similarity ends with Canigia. He was a striker, Argentine striker playing in Italy. Because of the long hair and the pace, he'd be like, Canigia. But I reckon, the state league players or team, if they had to go down and had no experience of street football down to the park, and I reckon that the street forged footballers might just have a little bit too much, to be honest. To be perfectly honest, that sort of streetwise type thing to manage the game, in that environment. That's my take on it. You might see it differently. That's sort of my take on it. It's always good to have different perspectives. You might have a different take on it altogether, but it's always great to hear different perspectives on these things.